Hello everyone and welcome to Hockey Up. So today we're doing another team preview and we're looking at the Florida Panthers. Now the Florida Panthers have been a disappointing team in the last few seasons. Despite their star power and the likes of Alexander Barkov and Jonathan Huberdeau, Florida hasn't been able to make a lot of noise in the playoffs or make the playoffs these past couple seasons. They did have a big offseason and a lot of names were brought in and brought out, but we're going to start with the names they brought in. Now, the Florida Panthers signed Alexander Wennberg in free agency. I think that this was one of the better under-the-radar signings from free agency. Columbus bought out Alexander Wennberg, and I still think Wennberg is honestly a solid third-line center, or maybe a fringe number 2 center on a team that doesn't have great center depth. I do like Wennberg's game. Injuries have really taken a hit on his play, and we've seen that lately. At some point in his career, he was like a 50 to 60 point centerman, but due to injuries, he's kind of taken a step back. But I think maybe in the right situation, he can bounce back to being that player, and maybe Florida is the right fit for him. It's a 1-year contract, so there's not a lot of risk in that, and overall, I think it was an astute signing by the Florida Panthers. They also signed Radko Gudas, who they gave a bit of money and term to. Gudas is one of the more physical and intimidating defensemen in the NHL. His overall numbers and stuff aren't that impressive, but you do pay for that grit and that physicality, and Gudas definitely provides that. They also traded for Marcus Nudavara. Nudavara is another probably bottom pairing defender, but honestly is a very solid bottom pairing defender. Definitely a good top 6 guy. And for a team like the Florida Panthers that seemingly always needs defense, they got Nudavara for cheap, and I think he should help shore up their defensive depth. Now, the Florida Panthers did actually lose quite a bit in free agency. They did lose Evgeny Dadonov. He ended up signing with the Ottawa Senators, and I think that was a very good signing for Ottawa. Honestly, for the contract that Ottawa gave to Dadonov, I don't see any reason why Florida wouldn't have been able to keep him. Dadonov has been a very good top-line forward for Florida, and I think losing him is a big loss. Maybe some of the rookies can help offset that loss, but still. And Mike Hoffman is still a unrestricted free agent, and I can't really see him returning to Florida. It just seems that there's not a lot of interest in either the player or the team coming back, so I count that as a loss. And once again, that's another big loss for Florida. Hoffman hit 70 points in Florida and has been one of their top 6 guys there the last 2 years and fit in really well in Florida, but yet they couldn't seem to re-sign him. Apparently, Hoffman is demanding a bit of money, and I get that Florida isn't exactly like the most big spending team in the NHL, but still, losing Hoffman is a big blow. They also lost Eric Halla, which he was kind of playing their second-line center role for them there. He didn't exactly fit in perfectly in Florida, so I can kind of understand why they let him walk. He hasn't signed anywhere either, so it is still technically possible he could return to Florida, but once again, I just don't see it. They also lost Mark Pezic, who was a useful depth player that could actually play both forward and defense. Nice little year for Pezic, but he ended up going to the Dallas Stars. So if you look at what Florida lost, I really did think that they lost more than they gained, and that's not a good thing for a team that always seems to kind of be spinning their wheels. But moving on to Florida's top 6, I have a lot of questions about this top 6. Now, we all know that Alexander Barkov and Jonathan Huberdeau are fantastic and 2 of the best players in the entire NHL. Huberdeau, in my opinion, is the most underrated player in the NHL. He's a 90-point winger. He plays solid in his own zone, and not a lot more you can ask from Huberdeau. Huberdeau's been consistently great for the past couple of years, and while Barkov had a bit of a down year this past year, he was still really good, and then the year before that, he was simply fantastic. One of the best centers in the NHL, and I think Barkov is due for another big year this upcoming season. But it's past those 2 guys that I have some questions about their top 6. They did trade for Patrick Hornqvist, which Hornqvist is a good forward at this point, but he is starting to age. We have seen a little bit of a decline from him in Pittsburgh, and I'm not sure if he's a true top 6 winger. I think he's a second-line winger, but definitely not first-line. And if you look at their forward depth, he might end up having to be first-line. There's also Alexander Wennberg, who I previously talked about, but I'm not sure if Wennberg can bounce back to that top 6 player form. I think at this point he's probably best suited as a third-line scoring center, but it looks like with their center depth, he's going to end up having to be the second-line center. Maybe that could lead to a breakout from Wennberg, but I'm just not sure. And then there's Owen Tippett, which Owen Tippett could come in and have a big impact as a rookie. He is one of the more highly touted prospects in the NHL, but it feels like we've been waiting a while for Owen Tippett's arrival, even though he wasn't drafted that long ago. But this should finally be the year. He has been groomed into that top 6 role, where he can come in and make an impact and maybe be a dark horse for the Calder Trophy. But then aside from those guys, I really don't know who else you could throw into that top six. I think maybe Noel Acciari is the logical answer. And while he did have a great first year with the Florida Panthers, being around 20 goals, I don't know if he's a true top six player, though. I mean, he did have a great year, but for most of his career, he has been a bottom six player. And if you have a guy like Noel Acciari in your top six, that just speaks to the fact that Florida really doesn't have good forward depth right now, which wasn't exactly the case before free agency when they still had Hoffman and Dadonov and Holla. But losing those three guys are very big losses, and it really reflects on their forward core. Now, Florida's top four is surprisingly solid, even though sometimes it doesn't perform like that. Aaron Ekblad is a solid defender, maybe not worth the first overall pick that was spent on him, but is definitely still a very good defenseman and still very young with a lot of room to grow. I do think that Ekblad will be a true top pairing D-man, and I know he already plays the top pairing in Florida, but I mean he will get that recognition as one of the better defensemen in the NHL. He does need to work on his defensive game a bit, but the offense is there, the physicality is there, and I think eventually Ekblad will really grow and mature into a true top pairing D-man and maybe a top 15 D-man in the league. There's also Keith Yandle, who Keith Yandle is actually a very good offensive defenseman, not that good in his own zone. He's kind of like a Kevin Shattenkirk or maybe a Tyson Barrie, but Yandle actually does seem to put up a lot of better offensive numbers. So Keith Yandle is a useful D-man for the Florida Panthers, but not necessarily in the defensive side of things, which has kind of been Florida's problem. But there is Mackenzie Weegar, and Weegar really had a breakthrough year as one of the better pure defensive defensemen in the NHL. Florida did sign him to a 3-year contract, which is good for the Florida Panthers that they were able to lock him up. He was in trade rumors for a while there, and I think it would have been a really bad look on the organization if they traded away their best defensive defenseman. I really like Mackenzie Weegar's game. He's got physicality, he's very smart defensively, uses his stick well, and there is a little bit of offense there. I think he can be about a 25-point defenseman over an 82-game schedule, and while that's not star numbers, if you factor in his defensive game, that makes him a very useful defenseman. And then I would probably have Anton Stralman in this top four. I don't know how much longer Stralman plays for the Florida Panthers, though, because he's already in trade rumors and he's only played one season there. I definitely think they overpaid for him in free agency, and his age is kind of starting to show, but he's still a solid defensive defenseman. Now, Florida's goaltending tandem is one of the more interesting ones in the NHL, led by Sergei Bobrovsky, who in Columbus was one of the best goalies in the league for the past 4 or 5 years. But going to Florida, he was simply brutal. He was one of the worst goaltenders in the NHL, and it kind of surprised me. I mean, I get that Columbus plays a very good system and arguably makes their goaltenders look better than they are at times, but it doesn't change the fact that Bobrovsky went from amazing to absolutely terrible. Even in the return to play, despite one good game and a few really good saves, Bobrovsky wasn't that good there either. So one has to wonder if it was just Columbus' system that was really helping Bobrovsky's play, and now Florida is going to be anchored with that massive $10 million contract for a goalie that can't play up to that level anymore. Florida really needs Bobrovsky to bounce back, or else they are going to be in a bad spot for a long time, because that contract is not movable. So Bobrovsky needs to bounce back. But there's also Chris Driedger, who came in for about 10 games or so and looked really good. He actually took over the starting job for that 10-game stretch. He wasn't given that role back in the return to play. Obviously, it was given to Bobrovsky. But Driedger actually looked very good, and I could see pushing for the backup job next year. Samuel Montembeault was envisioned to be the backup going into the season, but once again he struggled. I think the goaltending struggles in Florida is kind of a result of their defense not playing up to par. I really thought with their head coach Joel Quenneville coming in that it would really help out their goaltending numbers and their defensive numbers, since even the season before them when they had Luongo and Reimer, they were both putting up pretty bad numbers as well and were one of the worst goaltending tandems in the league. So Florida really needs to figure out their goaltending situation, and honestly, they simply need Bobrovsky to bounce back, and if he doesn't, it's going to be a massive problem for years to come. Now, Florida does have some real high-end talent, as I talked about earlier. I already talked about how good Alexander Barkov is, one of the best two-way centermen in the league, absolutely fantastic and dynamic offensive player, and does use his size and physicality as well. Then there's Jonathan Huberdeau, one of the best point-scoring wingers in the league. And then I would have Aaron Ekblad in there, and I would have Keith Yandle in there as well, two very good point-producing defensemen. And lastly, I would still have Sergei Bobrovsky on this list, despite the fact that he was brutal his first year in Florida. I do think that his resume in Columbus still keeps him in the best players list for Florida, but if he has another brutal year, he would be right out of this list. But overall, their best players are really good, and it is a good core. They just need surrounding pieces. But moving on to players I want to talk about. Now, I do want to talk about their star player and their captain, Alexander Barkov. Now, there was a bit of rumblings this offseason that maybe Barkov isn't long in Florida. His contract is up in a couple years, and it walks him straight into unrestricted free agency. And with some of the comments that Barkov has made, even at the awards ceremony in 2019, one has to wonder if he would consider re-signing in Florida. He is their captain, so I think he does probably re-sign in a couple years, but one does have to wonder. He's a very talented player, and Florida hasn't gotten a lot of success with him. So I wonder if maybe Florida would end up moving on from him. Maybe if they realize he's not going to re-sign, maybe look at trading him. That would be a huge blow to their franchise and set them back years, though. Barkov is truly one of the best in the NHL, and he's a player that Florida fans should hope sticks around for a while. But then another player I want to talk about is Owen Tippett. Now, Owen Tippett can really change the fate of the Florida Panthers this upcoming season. If Tippett can come in and score maybe 20 or 25 goals, or maybe even more, that would really help out Florida and help solidify that top six. I think if Tippett can be a serious point producer in his first year and in his career, that makes Florida's top six look a lot better and probably makes them a better team in general, definitely. So I do like Owen Tippett. He is one of my favorite prospects in the NHL, obviously playing for Team Canada in the past. And I do think he does have a lot of potential as a good goal-scoring winger, but he actually has also worked on his defensive game as well, which is something you want to see from a young prospect. And lastly, I want to talk about Jonathan Huberdeau. Now, I don't really have anything negative to say about Jonathan Huberdeau. More so, I'm just wondering when he's going to finally start getting the recognition he deserves. I do think that this upcoming Olympics, he's probably on Team Canada's roster, and in my opinion, is probably deserving of the top six role. Huberdeau is one of the best point-producing wingers in the entire NHL, and playing in Florida really hasn't helped his namesake. He doesn't get that much recognition, and he definitely should. You could make the argument that Huberdeau is actually Florida's best player, and I kind of agree with that argument. I do think, Barkov's defensive game really helps out, and him being a centerman, but I do think that Huberdeau is definitely the better point scorer between the two, and offensively is one of the best wingers in the league. The category I would have Florida in is a bubble team. I definitely cannot say for sure that the Florida Panthers will make the playoffs. A lot of people have been saying that for the last couple of years, and once again, they simply don't make the playoffs, even though they put out a good roster on paper, and it just never seems to click. I don't really know what more you can do with Florida. They've got one of the best head coaches in the NHL with Joel Quenneville. They brought in a star goaltender and he flopped. It's just, one has to wonder, how much longer is Florida going to be able to stay relevant and stay in Florida when they're not bringing in fans, they're not generating that much revenues, and their team consistently hasn't been able to make the playoffs. Florida is a team that definitely needs success. You look at Tampa Bay, and they sell out their games, and a part of that is because they're good. If Tampa Bay was a bottom of the league team, obviously they wouldn't get that high of an attendance, and that's kind of where Florida's at. So Florida really needs to start picking up traction as far as the direction of their team goes, so that way they can stay in Florida. I know a lot of NHL fans want to see the Florida Panthers move, and honestly, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I think that having two teams in the state of Florida is a little questionable, especially when there isn't a team in Quebec or even Houston. So I don't know how much longer the Florida Panthers stay in Florida, and part of that is the fact that they are always a bubble team. I can't say confidently that they'll make the playoffs. I do think that there's definitely a chance they can, but likely I think Florida's probably on the outside looking in again. But that does it for today's video. I appreciate you guys watching till the end. Obviously, I've changed the layout of my videos a bit. I am standing in a different position. I have the camera in a different position to try and show off some of the jerseys in the background, instead of just the Team Canada and Montreal ones over there. I am going to get new jerseys soon that I'm going to put on that rack behind me from different teams, and in general, I'm trying to expand out my collection a bit more. But thank you guys for all the support lately. I know that the it's still small, but it's only growing, and it's nice to see some of the comments that you guys are leaving, and I really appreciate it. So please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys later. Bye for now.